The smell of expensive champagne and quiet pretension filled the air as Foster Northwood stepped into the Lumiere Gallery, immediately regretting his decision to attend the opening alone. At 34, he had built North Star shipping into a global empire worth billions. Yet tonight he felt oddly vulnerable among the art crowd that filled the converted warehouse space in downtown Manhattan. He adjusted his custom Tom Ford suit armor for a man who rarely allowed himself to be seen without his carefully constructed persona. "Mr. Northwood, we're honored you could join us," the gallery owner, a thin woman with geometric glasses, approached with 2 champagne flutes. "The artist should be arriving shortly." Foster nodded politely, accepting the drink. "I've heard interesting things about this collection." A half-truth. His assistant had scheduled this appearance as part of his ongoing effort to cultivate a more relatable public image. Shipping magnates weren't exactly known for their warmth. It's causing quite a stir in the art world. Natalie Taylor seems to have emerged from nowhere with a perspective that's simply revolutionary. Foster barely contained his eye roll at the hyperbole. In his experience, revolutionary typically meant incomprehensible abstract splashes that sold for obscene prices to people desperate to appear cultured. He moved away from the gallery owner, weaving through the crowd toward the main exhibition space. The first painting stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't abstract at all, but a hyperrealistic scene of a shipping yard at dawn, cargo containers stacked like building blocks against a brooding sky. The composition was ordinary enough, but something about the light, the way it caught on the metal edges, the particular quality of the morning haze felt devastatingly familiar. It was his first shipping yard in Oakland, the one he'd purchased in a high-risk move 10 years ago that had ultimately launched his fortune. "That's not possible," he murmured, leaning closer to examine the brushwork. "What isn't possible?" a voice asked beside him. Foster turned to find a woman studying him rather than the painting. She wore a simple black dress that looked more comfortable than fashionable, her dark, curly hair pulled back in a loose knot, no makeup beyond a touch of color on her lips. She held a sparkling water rather than champagne. "This location," he said, gesturing to the painting, "it's specific. I'm surprised to see it here." She tilted her head. "Why? Because it's my shipyard, or it was when I was starting out." He studied her more carefully. "Are you a collector?" A slight smile touched her lips. "Not exactly." "I'm Natalie Taylor." Foster felt a rare moment of genuine surprise. The woman before him looked nothing like his mental image of a celebrated artist, no eccentric clothing, no air of self-importance. "Foster Northwood," he offered, extending his hand. "I know who you are, Mr. Northwood," she said, accepting his handshake. Her grip was firm, her palm slightly rough with what he imagined were the calluses of someone who worked with their hands. "Your reputation precedes you, as does yours, apparently. Though I have to admit I'm curious how you came to paint my shipyard." Natalie's eyes, a warm amber color, held his gaze directly. "I spent 6 months working on the docks in Oakland 3 years ago, research for this series." "Working on the docks?" Foster couldn't hide his skepticism. "Doing what exactly?" "Whatever they'd let me do, mostly inventory and basic logistics. I wanted to understand the flow of global commerce from the ground up." She gestured toward the next painting in the series. "Shall we?" Foster followed her to the next piece, a massive canvas depicting the interior of a container ship. Again, the detail was extraordinary, the specific configuration of the engine room, the quality of light filtering through narrow passages. It was unsettling how accurately she had captured spaces he knew intimately. "You have an eye for detail," he said, a vast understatement. "I have an eye for systems," she corrected, "for how things connect, how they move. What most people don't see when they look at something as mundane as shipping containers." They moved through the exhibition together, an impromptu private tour. Each painting revealed another aspect of global shipping, from dockyards in Singapore to canal passages in Panama to the executive offices of shipping companies. The final painting in the series made Foster's breath catch. It depicted a solitary figure standing on the bow of a massive container ship at sunset, face turned away from the viewer. Though the figure was small against the vastness of the ocean, something about the posture, the set of the shoulders, felt uncomfortably familiar. "Is that supposed to be me?" he asked quietly. Natalie studied the painting rather than him. "It's whoever you want it to be. I call it the price of empire." "That's rather judgmental." She turned to face him fully. "Is it? I spent 3 years researching this series, Mr. Northwood. I lived alongside dockworkers, traveled on cargo ships, interviewed everyone from deckhands to executives. I'm not judging, I'm observing." "And what did you observe about me?" Foster asked, suddenly intensely curious about how this woman perceived him. "I didn't paint you specifically," she said, but her slight hesitation suggested otherwise. "I painted the isolation that comes with building something larger than yourself." Before Foster could respond, the gallery owner appeared at Natalie's side. "Natalie, darling, there are some important collectors who are desperate to meet you." Natalie nodded politely, but turned back to Foster. "It was interesting meeting you, Mr. Northwood. I hope the exhibition didn't offend." "On the contrary," Foster said, surprising himself with his honesty, "it's the most interesting thing I've seen in quite some time." She smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her serious face, and then was whisked away into the crowd. Foster stood before the final painting for several long moments, feeling oddly seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and compelling. On impulse, he sought out the gallery owner. "I want to purchase the price of empire," he said. The gallery owner beamed. "Excellent choice, though I should inform you there's already significant interest in that piece." "I'll double whatever they're offering," Foster said flatly. 20 minutes later, a small red dot appeared next to the painting's information card. Foster finished his champagne and left the gallery, his thoughts unusually scattered. In the back of his town car, he found himself searching Natalie Taylor on his phone, hungry for information about the artist who had so accurately captured his world. The results were surprisingly sparse for someone with her talent. A modest website showcasing previous work, mostly urban landscapes and industrial scenes. A brief biography mentioning a fine arts degree from RIST and a series of residencies across the country. No social media presence to speak of. No personal details. The woman seemed to exist almost entirely through her art. Foster was still scrolling when his phone rang, his COO calling about a shipping crisis in Rotterdam. Just like that, he was pulled back into his world of logistics and global commerce, the art exhibition fading to the background of his consciousness. 3 days later, the painting arrived at his penthouse. Foster directed his housekeeper to hang it in his study, opposite his desk. Throughout the day, he found his eyes drawn to it repeatedly, that solitary figure against the vastness of the ocean. By evening, he had made a decision. Finding Natalie Taylor's contact information proved surprisingly difficult. The gallery refused to share it directly, citing privacy concerns. His assistant had to go through 3 different channels before securing an email address. Foster drafted and deleted 4 different messages before settling on something simple. "Miss Taylor, I'd like to commission a piece for my corporate headquarters. Would you be available to discuss?" Foster Northwood. Her response came the following morning. "Mr. Northwood, I don't typically do commissions, especially corporate ones." Natalie Taylor. Foster smiled at the bluntness. No fake politeness, no capitulation to his wealth or status. He replied immediately, "What if the commission isn't for the corporation but for me personally? And what if I promised complete artistic freedom?" 3 hours later. "I'm working in my studio today, 145 Barrow Street, 4B, 2 p.m. if you're serious." Foster rearranged 2 major meetings to make the appointment. His driver seemed confused when directed to a nondescript building in the West Village rather than the usual corporate destinations. Foster instructed him to wait, then climbed the 4 flights to apartment 4B. Natalie's studio was exactly what he might have expected, a converted loft space with enormous windows flooding the room with natural light. Canvases in various states of completion leaned against the walls. The smell of paint and turpentine hung in the air. What he hadn't expected was the music, classical violin concertos playing softly from a high-quality sound system. Natalie herself stood at an easel in the center of the room, hair pulled back, wearing paint-splattered overalls over a simple white t-shirt. She didn't look up when he entered. "You're punctual," she said, continuing to work on whatever was on the canvas. "I value time mine and others," Foster replied, moving further into the space. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "I haven't agreed to anything yet," she countered, finally turning to face him. She had a smudge of blue paint on her cheek. "I'm curious why a man who could commission any artist in the world would want another painting from me." Foster considered his answer carefully. "Your work shows an unusual understanding of my industry and a perspective I find challenging." Challenging is rarely what billionaires look for in their art purchases. They usually want something pretty that will appreciate in value. "I'm not most billionaires," Foster said, though he knew it was exactly what most billionaires would claim. Natalie seemed to think the same thing, her lips quirking in amusement. "What exactly would you want me to paint?" "I don't know yet," Foster admitted. "That's why I'm here. I thought perhaps we could discuss possibilities." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward a small sitting area by the windows. "Tea, coffee would be great." Foster watched as she moved to a small kitchenette in the corner of the studio, preparing 2 cups of coffee from a French press. Her movements were efficient and precise, like her brushwork. When she handed him the mug, a handmade ceramic piece with an uneven blue glaze, their fingers brushed briefly. "So," she said, settling into an armchair across from him, "tell me what you're looking for." Foster realized he didn't have a clear answer. The truth that he was intrigued by her perception of his world seemed too revealing. "Your shipping series captured something essential about the industry. I'd be interested in your perspective on other aspects of my business empire." Natalie took a sip of her coffee, watching him over the rim of her mug. "That sounds like corporate art, which I already told you I don't do." "What kind of art do you do then, besides exposing the loneliness of global capitalism?" The question came out more challenging than he'd intended. To his surprise, she laughed. "Is that what you think my work is about, exposing the evils of capitalism? Isn't it?" She shook her head. "I'm interested in systems, how they work, how they connect people and places, how they shape our lives in ways we don't always see. Shipping containers aren't just metal boxes, they're physical manifestations of human interconnection. That's not what most people see when they look at container ships." "No," she agreed. "Most people don't see them at all. That's part of the point." They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing from art to commerce to their divergent worldviews. Foster found himself engaged in a way he rarely was in business meetings. Natalie challenged his assumptions without dismissing his perspective. She was smart, articulate, and refreshingly direct. "You still haven't told me what you want me to paint," she said eventually. Foster realized the truth. "I don't know exactly, but I know I want to see the world through your eyes again." He paused, then added, "Perhaps we could continue this discussion over dinner." Natalie studied him, her expression unreadable. "Is this about art, or are you asking me on a date, Mr. Northwood?" "Foster," he corrected, "and maybe a bit of both." She smiled slowly. "I don't mix business with pleasure." "Then let's focus on the pleasure," Foster said, surprising himself with his forwardness. "Dinner tonight, no talk of commissions or art." "I have plans tonight," she said, but added, "I'm free tomorrow." "Tomorrow, then. I'll pick you up at 7. She nodded, standing to signal the end of their meeting. "Nothing too fancy, please. I don't own anything suitable for your usual establishments." "I'll find somewhere appropriate," Foster promised, suddenly looking forward to planning a dinner that would surprise and please her. The following evening, Foster's town car pulled up not to one of Manhattan's elite restaurants, but to a small Moroccan place in the East Village, known for its authentic food rather than its celebrity clientele. When Natalie emerged from her building, she looked both surprised and pleased at the destination. She wore a simple dark green dress that complemented her olive skin, her curly hair loose around her shoulders. Foster found himself momentarily speechless at how different she looked outside her studio environment, no less authentic, but softer somehow. "Not what I expected," she said as they were led to a small table in the back corner, cushioned with colorful pillows. I thought you might appreciate somewhere with character rather than Michelin stars, Foster said, pleased by her reaction. I do, she confirmed, settling onto the cushions. Though I'm curious how you even know about this place. It doesn't seem like your usual scene. I wasn't born wealthy, Foster reminded her. I spent my 20s discovering New York on a very modest budget. Some habits stick. Over the next 2 hours, they shared a feast of tagines, couscous, and grilled meats, accompanied by excellent Moroccan wine. The conversation flowed as easily as it had in her studio, but with a growing undercurrent of mutual attraction that Foster hadn't anticipated. He found himself talking about his childhood in Detroit, his father's job at the auto plants, his scholarship to MIT, things he rarely discussed in his current circles. Natalie shared her own story growing up in a small town in Oregon, discovering art as a teenager, working odd jobs to put herself through art school. I spent 5 years waiting tables and bartending before I could support myself with my art, she explained. Even now, I live pretty simply. Your work is extraordinary, Foster said sincerely. You should be commanding much higher prices, she shrugged. Money isn't my primary motivation. I need enough to live and keep working beyond that. I care more about creating meaningful work than maximizing profit. A foreign concept in my world, Foster admitted. Is it though? She challenged. You built your company from nothing. That couldn't have been just about the money. Foster considered this. It was about proving I could do it, creating something substantial. The money was a measure of success, not the goal itself. See, not so different after all, Natalie said, her eyes warm in the candlelight. After dinner, neither seemed ready for the evening to end. They walked through the East Village, stopping for gelato despite the cool spring air. Foster couldn't remember the last time he'd strolled aimlessly through the city, no driver waiting, no schedule to keep. This is nice, he said, realizing how inadequate the words were. It is, she agreed, her shoulder occasionally brushing against his arm as they walked. Though I keep waiting for you to check your phone or mention some crisis that needs your attention. My phone is on silent, Foster said, and any crisis can wait until morning. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Is that true? Because in my experience, men like you are never really off duty. Men like me, he echoed, unsure if he should be offended. Powerful men, men who have built empires, men whose identities are wrapped up in what they've created. Foster couldn't deny the accuracy of her assessment. I'm trying something different tonight. Why? She asked simply. Because being with you makes me want to, he answered honestly. Natalie studied him for a long moment, then stepped closer. Foster leaned down, drawn to her with a certainty that surprised him. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a sudden intensity that left them both breathless when they finally pulled apart. I still don't mix business with pleasure, she murmured, her hand resting lightly on his chest. Forget the commission, Foster said immediately. I'm much more interested in this, she smiled. Let me walk you back to your car, billionaire. I could walk you home, he offered. Maybe next time, she said, entwining her fingers with his as they turned back toward where his driver waited. At her building, Foster kissed her again, reluctant to let the evening end. When can I see you again? I'm working on a new piece this week, she said, but I'm free this weekend. Saturday, I'll plan something special. Nothing too extravagant, she warned. I meant what I said about simple pleasures, Foster smiled. Trust me. Over the next several weeks, Foster found himself restructuring his famously rigid schedule to create time for Natalie. They explored the city together, art galleries in Chelsea, hidden restaurants in ethnic neighborhoods, jazz clubs in Harlem. Foster discovered parts of New York he had forgotten existed, saw the city anew through Natalie's artist eyes. In her studio, he watched her work, mesmerized by the transformation that came over her when she painted. The focused intensity, the absolute presence in the moment. It was the same quality he recognized in himself when navigating complex business deals, but expressed in a way that created beauty rather than profit. The painting she was working on, a massive canvas depicting an urban landscape at dusk, took shape gradually during his visits. Foster found himself oddly protective of it, curious about its development, invested in its completion in a way he'd never been about art before. "What do you see when you look at the skyline?" she asked him one evening as they stood before the half-completed canvas. "Real estate values," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Investment opportunities, the tangible manifestation of economic power. And I see light and shadow, the human impulse to reach toward the sky, thousands of stories happening simultaneously behind all those windows." She touched his arm lightly. "That's why we're good for each other. Different perspectives. Are we good for each other?" Foster asked, suddenly serious. Natalie turned to face him fully. "I think we could be if we're brave enough." Foster pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by the realization that he was falling in love with this woman who saw the world so differently from him. Their relationship progressed quickly after that night. Foster introduced Natalie to his small circle of trusted friends. She brought him to gallery openings where she wasn't the featured artist, showing him the art world from an insider's perspective. Their worlds collided in unexpected ways. At a charity gala Foster was obligated to attend, Natalie charmed his business associates with her direct manner and genuine interest in their work. At a bohemian dinner party with Natalie's artist friends, Foster surprised everyone, including himself, with his willingness to engage in passionate debates about social responsibility and corporate ethics. The only significant tension arose around Foster's wealth. Natalie steadfastly refused his more lavish gifts, declined his offers to pay off her student loans, insisted on paying her own way whenever possible. "I'm not with you for your money," she explained when he expressed frustration. "I need to maintain my independence, my own identity." "I'm not trying to buy you," Foster countered. "I just want to share what I have." "I know," she said gently. "But wealth like yours comes with power imbalances. I need us to be equals." Foster struggled to understand her perspective but respected her enough to try. He learned to offer experiences rather than possessions, to find ways to share his privileged life without overwhelming her independence. 4 months into their relationship, Foster faced a business crisis that required his immediate attention in Singapore. What should have been a 3-day trip stretched into 2 weeks of intense negotiations. "I'm so sorry," he told Natalie during their nightly video calls. "This deal is critical for our expansion in Southeast Asia." "I understand," she said, though he could see the disappointment in her eyes. "Your work is important." On the 12th day, exhausted and frustrated with the stalled negotiations, Foster realized he was making the same choice he had always made, prioritizing business over personal life. It was the choice that had ended his previous relationships, the choice that had left him successful but alone. He called Natalie from his hotel suite. "I miss you," he said simply. "I miss you too," she replied. "How are the negotiations going?" "They're stalled. But I've realized something. I have an entire executive team capable of handling this. I don't need to be here personally. Foster, I don't want you to neglect your business for me." "I'm not," he assured her. "I'm finding a balance. For the first time, I have something in my life that matters as much as my work. More, actually." The next day, Foster handed the negotiations over to his COO and boarded his private jet back to New York. He went directly from the airport to Natalie's studio, arriving unannounced. He found her standing before the urban landscape she'd been working on for months. It was finished now, a breathtaking view of Manhattan at the precise moment between day and night, when the natural and artificial light achieve perfect balance. What struck him most was the perspective, not from street level looking up, nor from a penthouse looking down, but from mid-height, where most of the city actually lived. "It's extraordinary," he said from the doorway. Natalie spun around, her face lighting up with surprise and joy. "Foster, I thought you were in Singapore." "I was," he said, crossing the room to take her in his arms. "But I realized I needed to be here more." Later that evening, curled together on the worn sofa in her studio, Foster told Natalie about his decision. "I've been thinking about what you said about systems and connections, about seeing what others don't see." He took her hand in his. My whole adult life, I've been building a global shipping network. I've been obsessed with creating efficient systems for moving goods across the world. That's not a small achievement, Natalie said. No, but I missed something fundamental. I created all these connections between places but forgot to create meaningful connections in my own life. He squeezed her hand. Until you. Are you saying I'm your most efficient shipping route to happiness? She teased. Foster laughed. I'm saying I love you, and I'm ready to build something with you that matters more than any business empire. Natalie's eyes grew serious. I love you too. But I need you to understand something important. I can't become an appendage to your world. I need my art, my independence. I know, Foster said. I'm not asking you to change. I'm telling you that you've changed me, for the better. 6 months later, Foster stood beside Natalie at the opening of her new exhibition, an exploration of urban landscapes from 5 global cities. The centerpiece was the Manhattan Twilight piece he'd watched her create. To his surprise, the gallery had placed it beside The Price of Empire from her shipping series, the painting of the solitary figure that he had purchased at their first meeting. They belong together, Natalie explained, slipping her hand into his. The journey from isolation to connection. Foster looked at the paintings with new understanding. The solitary figure on the ship now seemed less lonely than contemplative, poised at a moment of transition. The urban landscape, with its balance of shadow and light, offered a vision of community and possibility. They tell a story, he realized. Our story, Natalie confirmed. At least the beginning of it. That night, after the successful exhibition opening, Foster took Natalie to the rooftop garden of his penthouse apartment. The space had been transformed with hundreds of tiny lights that mirrored the city skyline beyond. What is all this? Natalie asked, turning in wonder at the magical setting. Foster took her hands in his. When we met, I was like that figure in your painting, successful but isolated, master of an empire that meant less than I wanted to admit. You showed me a different way of seeing the world. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Inside was not the massive diamond she might have expected, but a simple platinum band inlaid with tiny blue stones that matched the paint she always seemed to have smudged somewhere on her hands. I'm not asking you to change who you are or give up any part of your independence, Foster said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I'm asking if we can build a life together, one that honors both our worlds. Tears shimmered in Natalie's eyes as she looked from the ring to his face. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. As they kissed under the starlit sky, Foster understood what Natalie had been showing him all along, that the most important connections aren't the ones that span oceans or generate wealth, but the ones that bridge different ways of seeing the world. In finding each other, they had each found a new perspective, a more complete vision of what life could be. A year later, they were married in a ceremony that reflected their blended worlds, held in an industrial space. Natalie had transformed with her art, attended by shipping executives and struggling artists alike. They established a foundation that provided studio spaces and financial support for emerging artists, particularly those interested in exploring the intersection of commerce and creativity. Foster maintained his position at the helm of North Star Shipping, but with a new approach to leadership that valued human connection alongside efficiency and profit. Natalie continued her artistic career, her work evolving to explore new themes while maintaining her unique perspective on systems and interconnection. And in their home, a renovated warehouse space that combined Foster's appreciation for luxury with Natalie's artistic sensibility, the two paintings hung side by side, The Price of Empire and the Manhattan Twilight. Not just the beginning of their story anymore, but a daily reminder of the journey that had brought them together from isolation to connection, from separate worlds to a shared life where both could thrive without diminishing the other. Each morning, Foster would stop before the paintings, remembering that fateful gallery opening when a billionaire shipping magnate had unexpectedly found himself truly seen by an artist who would teach him to believe in love.